Good evening. Thank you for joining us. If you're here, you're one of the early birds. I know that people will slowly be coming on board. This is our very first real live stream event, and we wanted to bring this to you in this way in hopes of getting even more people to hear the message. Now, I know we're up against an important event tonight. Don't let that dissuade you from listening in. I promise the message will be brief, but very worthwhile for you. I want to let you know I've got a team here behind the screen. You're going to meet Sarah in a minute. And I also have Kelly here working behind the scenes. And what Kelly is going to be doing is monitoring your questions. So whether you are watching on Facebook or on YouTube, if you have a question for Sarah while she's speaking, simply type it into the chat. We will recognize that and try to answer all of your questions. I see Mike has chatted in. He's tested the chat channel, so we can all say hello. It looks like Sarah is ready. So again, listen in. I'm pleased to present to you the State Director for Convention of States, Michigan, and one of the hardest working women I know, Sarah Santana. Good evening, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Before we get started, let's bow our heads and start with some prayer. Father, I want to thank you for your goodness and your faithfulness and for allowing us to gather here tonight. I ask that you would be with everyone out there, whether they're on this call or rooting for their favorite team, Father. We ask that you would be with them, that you would guide all of us and lead us, especially in our discussion tonight. We thank you and we praise you. Amen. All right. Tonight, we are going to be talking about our plans here for Convention of States, Michigan in 2024. I don't know if you're ready with that image or not, Robin. Probably not yet. You can throw it up whenever you are, but we're going to be talking about broken roads tonight, in particular, the broken road that our country is on. Our nation is, well, you know how our nation is. It's going on a path that doesn't seem to have a very hopeful future. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is our national debt. It's currently surpassed $34 trillion. Our individual citizens' share of that is over $101,000, which is, I don't have that kind of money. You may, but I don't have that kind of money to just throw at some national debt. We have career politicians. We have power constantly moving farther and farther away from the people. Our states used to be in charge of a lot of the decision making in our country, and now it's all in Washington, D.C. Our state's budget that our legislatures decide on, 40 to 60% of that budget is controlled by the federal government. That's a problem. That's a problem for you and me as citizens, because we look at our state legislators and say, this is what you should be doing in our state. And they only have control of 40 to 60% of the budget to try to do that with. The rest of it, federal government's deciding with one big broad brush what should happen. So we have power moving away. We have huge national debt. And most importantly, we have we the people that have forgotten what our role in our country is supposed to be. That's how we got in this situation to begin with. We forgot our role. What is our role? Well, the federal government, most people think, is in charge. And they dictate to the states, and the states dictate to us. But that's not what the founders envisioned. And when we open up our Constitution, we see the words, we the people of the United States of America. Why does it start with that? Because it was we the people that entrusted authority to the state legislatures, which in turn voted to authorize the federal government to have authority. Ultimately, the power that our government holds comes from us. We give it to the states, they give it to the federal. Because we give the power, we have the responsibility to keep people accountable. And that's something we haven't done as a people. So how do we fix that problem? That is the $1,000,000 question, right? How do we fix the situation we're in? And the answer is pretty simple. We can do one of two things. We can say, well, this is the bed we made and we're going to lay in it. I don't know about you. I'm not particularly keen on that. Or we can do the second option. We can embrace stewardship. We can decide to be guardians of our freedoms. And we can acknowledge that our duty as citizens doesn't end at the ballot box. That's where it begins. We have to hold our legislators accountable, not just when we vote for them, but the entire time that they're in office. That means communicating with them, being aware of what's going on, and doing our part as citizens to make sure that the path that our country is going on is the one that we want it to be going on. Well, for Convention of States, Michigan, that choice is pretty clear. We're choosing door number 2. So we're going to go about this in a couple of different ways. There's a couple different areas that we have to attack, have to be active in. One is legislatively. You're probably wondering, what is Convention of States doing in Michigan? How come we're not passing anything? Well, in 2024, we are hoping to pass some legislation. We are hoping to pass what is called a commissioner selection resolution and a criminal penalty bill. What that is, if you're familiar with Convention of States and Article 5, Robin, you got to help me out on here. What's the word? Article 5 conventions, that's the word. If you're familiar with the conventions and how they are brought about and how each state sends commissioners, then you've probably had the thought, how are commissioners selected? Who goes from my state? Well, a commissioner selection resolution answers that question. This is very important because regardless of whether our state passes the Convention of States resolution, all it takes is 34 states to get an Article 5 Convention of States. So we have to have a process in place to make sure that as a state, we send people to represent us. There are going to be 34 states that do this. That means there's going to be 16 states that don't. Regardless of whether we're in the 34 or the 16, we want to have our opinions present at that convention. So we want to pass a commissioner selection bill, a commissioner selection resolution in the Michigan State Legislature this year. Will it happen? Well, I can't tell you that, but we're definitely going to be working on it and we would appreciate your help. The second thing we want to pass is a criminal penalty bill. A criminal penalty bill would establish criminal penalties for a commissioner that tried to go outside of his authority, or an individual who tried to coerce a commissioner into doing something outside of their authority, or basically abuse the what is the word? Abuse the convention. See, folks, normal people abuse the convention for their own purposes and for a purpose that it isn't intended to be used for. So these two things are very important to have in place regardless of whether we pass or don't pass the Convention of States resolution, but they help pave the way for our participation. And I'm really, really excited to see us work on this. Once we have these in place in Michigan, we're going to be a lot closer to being able to say, let's pass the Convention of States resolution. The second thing we need to do is to build our local teams. If you are part of the signer group that supports Convention of States, you may or may not have things happening near you that our team is doing. And if you've ever wondered, how come I never see a Convention of States Michigan event anywhere near me? Well, the reason is probably that we do not have a lot of volunteers right in your area. If that's the case, we would love to have you join us. So growing the team so that we can get better reach and reach out to more legislators and allow the public to know more about us is extremely important as well. Robin, do we have any questions yet?
I do not see any questions in here yet. Let me see. Oh, wait, yes. we do. This is from Jim Carter. For the commissioner selection, are we using other states' methods as a template for selecting and providing penalties?
We actually have the National Organization for Convention of States, which of course we are part of. We are the Michigan branch, has created model language for a commissioner selection resolution as well as for the criminal penalty bill. You can view that on our website. Kelly, would you mind putting that in the chat for people?
It's in there. She did put it in there.
Oh,
Yep.
perfect. Perfect. You can look at the link Kelly has shared, and you can see there's a whole page, and it will talk about what the commissioner selection resolution is and what the criminal penalty bill is. And there's actually a link to the language itself, which you can download and take a look at. Now, each state would alter the language a little bit to suit their individual legislature. Not every state's legislature uses the same language or has quite the exact same structure. So there's probably going to be some alterations state to state, but this is a good starting point, and I am excited to see what Michigan can do with it.
We have another question. Do you have state legislators you are working with?
We do have some state legislators we are working with. We would always like to be working with more, though. So if you want to reach out to your legislators and say, hey, it would be a wonderful idea if you supported having a commissioner selection resolution passed in Michigan or a criminal penalty bill passed in Michigan, that would be wonderful. And as soon as we have actual numbers for the legislation, we will send out to all of our signers so that you're aware and you can follow along with the process.
There's a question in the chat from Rhonda, and it says, please state the first thing you mentioned. I'm not clear on that since we've been live now for 12 minutes. The beginning is
the first thing I mentioned.
It might, the commissioner selection bill.
Commissioner selection resolution, yes.
Yes, she wants to know about the commissioner selection bill. Yes, that's what she's asking about.
All right.
If you just maybe a restatement of what that is.
Right. So it's two different pieces of legislation. One is the commissioner selection resolution, which would cover how a commissioner is selected, things like how they would be paid, how many commissioners would they be, who would get to choose, would the entire legislature vote on it, that kind of thing, as well as who would keep an eye on them. I'm assuming that we would like someone to be keeping an eye on what the commissioners are doing to make sure that they are keeping Michigan's interests in mind as they do their job. Of course, I would assume that they would want to keep Michigan's interests in mind, but it never hurts to be safe, right? So establishing a structure by which we would basically keep an eye on the commissioners, provide them support, as well as be able to replace commissioners if, let's say, someone got sick or had a family emergency. How are we going to vote in a new commissioner to represent us? So those sorts of things are the things that a commissioner selection resolution would cover. The criminal penalty bill, of course, is very straightforward. It's the criminal penalties for abusing or attempting to abuse that position or attempting to manipulate someone who is using that position. Okay,
so I've got a couple more questions, and I'm going to try this really cool feature. And let's see, I'm going to put it up there. This is from Charlotte Pickert. What happens if Convention of States is successful nationally? How would it be structured differently in running the country?
That's a fantastic question, Charlotte. Convention of States, the Article 5 convention that we're having states pass resolutions for, is focused on three particular areas. We would like to see amendments to the Constitution that would propose term limits for federal officials, that would add fiscal restraints on our federal government, and would reduce the size and jurisdiction of the federal government. If you look at our Constitution the way you would have learned about it, it's a little pamphlet. It's not all that long, and it's very manageable. If you order the Constitution from our federal government today, it's over 3,000 pages long, because they've included every court case that they've used to change the meanings of the words in the original Constitution. And I've actually seen a picture of the book. It's quite amazing. It's like that big. What we're trying to do is get back to the original. That's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to bring the power of our country back into balance, where the things that were supposed to be with the states are with the states. Right now, the federal government regulates everything you own. Your water heater is regulated by the federal government. It wasn't intended to be, but it is. And why is a much longer conversation. And if you tune into our event, what is it, next week, Robin, on Thursday?
Yes, we'll be talking about it.
We're going to have an introduction to convention of states, and I will answer all those questions. That's probably a longer conversation than anyone wants tonight. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is bring it all back in so that the states have the power that the states are supposed to have. If everything is successful, we would see maybe term limits on federal officials. I can't see any way that that would be a particularly bad thing in our country. And fiscal restraints. Our national debt is over $34 trillion. And it's going up regardless of who is in power. We actually have a lovely chart, and it shows that regardless of which party is in power, the national debt looks like this. It went up with Clinton. It went up with Obama. It went up with Bush. It went up with Trump. It's going up right now. It's just continuing. And the parties are pretty much equal when it comes to who is racking up the most debt. This is just a structural problem at this point.
$53,000 a second, I read. Wow. There are people that don't make $53,000 in a year, but our debt ranks up at $53 a second. We have got, Kelly's doing a good job responding to some of these in the chat. I'm going to put another question up from Jim Carter. How are we, for lack of a better term, targeting Democratic representatives and senators to support the resolution for a convention of states?
It's an interesting question. Convention of states is a nonpartisan issue. So we're not, I would say that we don't have to approach only one party. The issues of national debt, term limits for federal officials, and bringing the power back to the states are things that are beneficial to both parties. They're just beneficial to Americans. This isn't a party issue. This is an American issue. This is about us as we, the people, looking at the problem and saying, how can we solve this problem? Who cares about parties, basically? For a Democrat or a Republican representative, you can go to them and say, what we want to do is take the power that you're supposed to have back from the federal government and place it in your hands. You live here right next to us. You see the problems in Michigan more than the people in Washington, D.C. do. Don't you think that you would be better at using your budget and using the power to help the people of Michigan than the people in Washington, D.C.?
Let's see. Oh, Mike has an interesting comment, just a commentary in there. Thank you, Mike, for all of that. I want to put this up on the screen here for a minute. Sarah talked about another event we have coming up. We're used to doing in-person presentations, and we will continue to do those all over the state. But to address Sarah's situation that she said earlier, you don't see events going on around you. The solution is to bring you all online again. So Thursday, January 18th at 7 o'clock, Sarah's going to do an information session on the ins and outs of Convention of States, what we are doing, where it's going, how it will affect all of us. And you will be able to be involved, to hear this, to ask your questions live during that event. Again, it's Thursday, January 18th at 7 o'clock on Zoom, and I built a QR code for you. So if you just snap this slide here, you will have that. And of course, it's also on our calendar. If you ever want to know what Convention of States is doing around the state, please go to our website, conventionofstates.com/Michigan, and click on the events tab, and it will show you all of our events, and that Zoom link will be in there.
Now, I'm trying to remember the lady who asked about what is our country going to look like if we actually have a convention. There's a lot of steps between where we are and having the convention and after the convention. We have to get to a convention, which requires the 34 states. And we currently are at 19, which is fantastic. We've made huge progress towards that, and we have wonderful momentum moving forward. But even once we get to that convention, the hard work isn't done. We have to get proposed amendments, and then we have to get those proposed amendments ratified, because the convention itself doesn't make any amendment law. The convention can't change the Constitution, which is very important, actually. It's a very important point to remember. Who can change the Constitution is the state legislators. Again, because that's where the authority lies in our country. We give authority to the state legislators. They give authority to the federal government. They have the authority to change, to change the Constitution. It requires 34, it requires 38 states, though, to agree on an amendment to change the Constitution. Why am I bringing all this up right now? Because what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment is to volunteer. And I'm trying to explain to you why. Because what we're trying to do is not just pass a resolution in Michigan. What we're trying to do is get back to that point in our country where we have a structured government that makes sense, a government that allows for the people to have more of a voice than we do right now. To do that, we have to be there talking to our legislators. We have to be talking to them to get the resolution passed in Michigan. We have to be talking to them when there is a convention so that they know our thoughts. They know what we want them supporting. They know what we want them to be proposing at the convention. And after amendments come out of convention and come back to the state legislators, we need to be talking to the state legislators to tell them exactly what we think they should make law in our country, what amendments we want them to pass. What that means is that we need a strong grassroots movement. Now, you don't have to be an official volunteer with Convention of States to talk to your legislator or to support what we're trying to do. It does make things simpler because you'll be on the ends with all the information. So become a volunteer. But regardless of whether you officially volunteer or whether you don't officially volunteer, plan to be a voice talking to your legislator through this process. Now, all of this is the reason why growing our grassroots is so important. Because in order to make the changes we need in our country, we have to change from the people that allowed our country to get in this situation through our inactivity to the people who are going to keep an eye on it, who are going to steward it, who are going to guard our freedoms and make sure that we move into the correct course of action and stay in it. Because let me tell you, if we go and we pass some amendments and then we say, okay, hands off, we're good, and we stop paying attention in our country, we're going to lose it again. Freedom is always that close from being lost. We have to stay on it. So we're growing the grassroots. That doesn't just mean volunteers who have a volunteer title in our system and go to our meetings. This means growing the number of people in our state who understand what we're up against in our country, who understand the authority vested in them, and understand their place as a citizen to make a difference. So when we say grow the grassroots, we mean we need to reach out to every Michigander and make sure that every Michigander understands what this is, how to be involved, and who they are intended to be as stewards of our country. So here's my pitch for volunteering. Become a volunteer. We're awesome. No, sorry. We have a lot of volunteer opportunities. Was that good, Robin?
You're so animated, Sarah.
Sometimes the mom comes out. I can't keep it in. We have a lot of things you can do as a volunteer. Speaking of being a mom, there's a lot of things you can do if you're a mom. There's a lot of things you can do from home. If you like to go places and talk to people, there's a lot of things you can do going places and talking to people. If you like to do things on the computer, we got stuff. If you like to do things on the phone, we got stuff. If you don't like to do things on the computer or phone, we've got stuff for that too. You can go to our website, conventionestates.com/MI volunteer. You can see a whole list of the volunteer positions that we have that we would love to have you fill. We're pretty awesome people, right, Robin?
And we're fun.
We're so much fun.
And we're
You
learning
are
new things.
to
We're
hang out
doing
with
new scary things like live streaming
Oh, goodness.
without our director.
Do we have any more questions?
We do have a few questions in here. I just wanted to say hello to Matthew Zale from Scranton, Pennsylvania. He said thanks. And let's see. Kurt responded to a message. Jim Carter again. I'm not sure you have an answer to this question, but let me put it up there for you. I understand what we need to explain to those who do not support the resolution, but what is the plan for convincing them to provide their support?
For Jim, I'm not sure if you're asking about convincing them to provide support for the Convention of States resolution or for the legislation we're looking to push this year. But I can tell you, as far as the commissioner selection resolution goes, this is beneficial for every single legislator. It's beneficial for every single state. It's in the best interest of every state to have a process in place to be able to have representation at an Article 5 convention. There have been a lot of different Article 5 movements in our country's history. Now, when I say movement, let me define that. There have been a lot of different resolutions passed calling for an Article 5 convention. They have been passed calling for conventions for a large variety of different topics. Some of the earliest calls had to do with asking for a convention to get a Bill of Rights. Of course, Congress then proposed that, so we didn't have to have an Article 5 convention. There have been Article 5 convention resolutions passed regarding slavery, regarding direct election of senators, regarding a whole slew of different issues. Balanced budget is a really big one. There have been a lot of resolutions passed for that. We've had well over 300 resolutions passed in our country's history calling for an Article 5 convention, and actually I believe the number is quite a bit higher than that. We have over 200 active applications currently in with Congress for an Article 5 convention. So the big question is, why haven't we had one? And the simple answer to that is that it requires 34 applications from different states on the same topic, and we have not had 34 for the same topic. 34 is the magic number because it is 2/3 of the states, and that is what is required by the Constitution. What I'm saying all of that for is to let you know that there is a lot of different material out there, a lot of different applications out there that could add up to a convention that isn't our Convention of States convention that we're trying to get. There's a lot of other ones out there that could get the required 34 states. And if that happens, even though it's not the one I'm currently trying to get, I want us there. I don't want decisions and amendments being proposed without Michigan having a say in it. We want to be there. And I'm sure citizens from every other state feel the exact same way. And I'm sure if you go to your legislators and you say, we don't want to have anyone at this convention supporting us, they would go, what? Of course we want someone there. Of course we do. Why would we want to allow the other 49 states to make a decision on what is going to be proposed? It won't be passed, but proposed without us being there. So every state is going to want to have a process in place. This isn't really something I think we're going to really have to work hard to convince them about. I think this is kind of a common sense issue. And if you go to your legislator and you explain the content of what we're trying to pass to them in that manner, I don't think you're going to have pushback on that. I really don't. As far as Convention of States resolution is concerned, I think it's pretty much the same way. Lay it out to them. Explain to them what they stand to gain from a convention of states, where we are bringing the power from the federal government back to the states. And I think they'll start to see the value in that as well.
All right. Oh, the questions. Oh, there's a couple here. John Polster asked a question. I think Kelly answered it, but let me put John's question up there. How do we get the last 4 states to ratify the proposed amendments that came out of a convention that they didn't want to have to begin with? And I love Kelly's response. Says hopefully by the time we have a convention, there will be at least 38 states that want to participate in the amendment process. We keep working, educating, and informing, exclamation point.
Exactly. We have teams working, volunteer grassroots teams working in all 50 states. Just because we're going to get a convention at 34 doesn't mean that there won't be more states that haven't decided to jump on board. So our job is to work in all of our states. If we have people here from different states, thank you for joining us. We're all working in our own states. And we are all 50 states trying to pass. So it's entirely possible that we're going to have 50 states that want to participate in this by the time we actually get that convention.
I know we're running up against our end time. So Jim, I think we can handle your additional question after the fact. But for Mike Ruiz, we hear a bit about this. What about people who say there will be a runaway of Article 5 if we pass it?
I will address this in detail if you come next week to my Convention of States presentation. I'd be happy to address the runaway myth. I have some fantastic data for you on that, but it isn't a fast explanation. The simple answer is that if you understand the way an Article 5 works, and you understand the legalities behind it, and all of that, you'll realize it can't happen. The number one reason being that the state legislatures get to decide whether or not an amendment gets passed, whether it actually becomes law. They're the ones that look at every amendment in our country's history and decide whether it's a yes or a no. All the amendments that we currently have were passed by state legislatures. And that will be the truth again. There's no way around that. That's what the Constitution says. The only difference between Congress proposing an amendment and a convention of states, an Article 5 amendment proposing convention, is that with an Article 5 amendment proposing convention, the states have more say in what gets proposed. And what we need proposed in our country right now are things that Congress is not going to propose. They're not going to say, we want term limits. They're not going to say, we want less authority to spend money irresponsibly. And they're definitely not going to say, we want to give you back the power and jurisdiction that was originally yours and that we have stolen. They're not going to do that. But at a state-initiated Article 5 convention, the states can say, we need these amendments in our country.
So we've had some people coming in and out. I want to say hello to the people who have come in recently. Jeffrey, Kenyon, Michael, Alice said thank you for informing us. I have no additional questions other than I want to put this back up and remind everyone, and I will leave this here. Now, this recording will stay on YouTube. It will stay on Facebook. It will be available for you to watch and, more importantly, to share with your friends.
And remember, volunteer, because we're awesome.
We have fun. We're making a difference. All right, Sarah, I'm going to take this screen out and remove myself. And if you would take us to the end, please.
All right. You can make a difference. That's the biggest takeaway. And honestly, that is why being a part of the Convention of States team is fun. Because we get to be part of something where we're making a difference, an actual solution. And right now in our country, what we need is to be part of an actual solution. So I would encourage you to join us. If you don't feel called to join us, I would encourage you to look around you and see what other areas you can make a difference this year, because we need to be stewards of our country. Now, having said all that, God is good. He's in control and He is faithful. And if we stand up and we do what we need to do, He will show up and He will provide the victory. So let's close in prayer, and I'll let you all have a wonderful evening. Father, we thank you and we praise you. And we ask that as we go through 2024, that you would guide our steps and that you would open a way before us and show us how you want each and every one of us to make a difference. And we ask that your will would be done in Michigan and in the United States. Amen. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at askmi@cosaction.com. Have a wonderful evening. God bless.